All right, thank you very much. Now, that introduction, of course, is designed to get you sort of sat up right on the edge of your seats. What I would suggest is that there is every chance over the next 20 minutes you might nod off. So you're probably best slipping back into your seats. I'd rather that you didn't fall asleep over the next 20 minutes. For a start, it's dangerous. You might injure the person next to you, and it's quite distracting for me as well up here. So my talk is called The Problem with Paradigms. It's somewhat negatively framed, but it's actually a fairly positive talk. So I'm going to go through about 6 paradigms that I think sort of dominates the practice, so our practice as change practitioners. And then I'm going to go through 5 things that I think that we can do as change agents to move that forward. So yeah, just quickly, as Timo's alluded to, I run a social enterprise in Perth. I've done a lot of work across a broad range of areas, most recently on the Sustainable Health Review. I've been doing some work for a St John's ambulance contract with the Department of Health, a lot of community engagement work, and also a fairly sizable behaviour change pilot in the city of Swan with Aboriginal women looking to prevent violence there. And what I will be talking to today, as I say, is paradigms, paradigmatic thinking. So what is it? So it's a perception. It's the systems within which we work and think. Yeah. So as an individual society, clear example, model, a pattern of how things work in the real world. And I think as change practitioners, we're really quite good at looking downstream and sort of applying this sort of thing to the communities that we're looking to serve. So paradigmatic thinking, unity of beliefs that guide the planning and implementation of actions. So I think we're pretty good at looking down there. But I think what we don't do quite so often is take a step back and have a look in the mirror and really think about what we do as a community of practice. And I guess for me, that's really the aim of the next 20 minutes or so, is just to look at some of the things that I've noticed over, I guess, my time in the business. And yeah, there is a caveat. So I'm looking up here because this screen's sort of flickering in and out, so I'm having to look back here. So I was once upon a time a journalist, so I have atoned for my sins. You can trust me, I promise. But I will sort of draw on some of the skill sets that I used in print journalism through this slide set. So there is fairly heavy use of hyperbole. There's going to be a lot of sweeping generalisations, fair bit of sensationalism, etc., etc. So, I could have a list of caveats as long as what you just saw, sort of Rory's terms and conditions, but we'll just assume that they're there. So this may not all apply to you, yeah? If it does, take it on board, and if it doesn't, that's fine. I am talking in generalisations. So first of all, and this is something that I've been sort of talking to people about the whole time through here, is sort of like, who's the expert? We're very much still in this space driven by expertise, and typically expertise in specific disciplines. So it's very much a top-down approach that gets applied, but there's a lack of trust in the people who have that expertise. Not so much, I think there's about 15% of you are academics, so not so much in you guys are okay, but the rest of us perhaps a lot less. And certainly in government and in politicians and in that sort of public messaging, it's just not there quite so much. So I think we really need to sort of change our thinking in terms of this top-down approach and really start working a lot more from the ground up. And as a social marketer, I mean, that's very much one of the, I guess, 2 core tenets of my practice, is working with communities to sort of get insights and act on those insights, and then mix that with the expertise. A couple of other things. Oftentimes the expertise resides in a field of study, not the actual issue itself. And I think that's something often that we forget as well. So, I'm no expert in domestic violence. I have some expertise in social marketing, but if I want to understand domestic violence, I need to talk to the experts in that. That's typically the people that are experiencing it and or the people that are actually perpetrating. So that's who we need to be having conversations with a lot more. So it's not to say that the expertise isn't valuable, it's just to say that we need to sort of mix that with the expertise and the lived experience of people on the ground. I do also think sometimes most of my work tends to be in public health and public health messaging, and I think sometimes we can be a bit loose with the truth as well in that, and I think we need to be careful there too. The public aren't as stupid as some people like to think. They're actually pretty switched on, and they've got a pretty good bullshit radar, so they can see it coming. So shift needed, as I say, I think we need more honesty, I think we need meaningful engagement, I think we need a little less ego in what we do. And I think, we need to act as facilitators of change rather than leaders of change. I think that's really important. So next one, tokenistic engagement. This is a theme, again, that's been touched on a fair bit over the last day or two. Nobody wants to be Rudolph in this picture, but pretty much every consumer that I know who sits on a board as a consumer rep feels like Rudolph, yeah? We need to do better. We need to do better than one person on a board as the voice of all consumers. They can't be that voice. I sit in that role on a number of boards. It's a really difficult thing to do. So there's a lack of meaningful engagement. I've been involved in consultations for different government organisations where the strategy is being written while I'm having to sit and talk to people on the ground who are providing feedback to inform said strategy. So there's something really wrong, you know, that's not right. And I think, again, we need to do better. So I now push back, and I guess my message is I'd love it for more of us to be pushing back at that sort of practice. I just now say no to those sort of jobs. So co-design, fantastic, but it tends to default to designing solutions to predefined problems. The value for me in co-design is working with people to actually frame problems, because we tend to sit up here and we tend to, again, as experts, work up what we think the problems are, but that tends to be framed completely differently down here. The problems are very different down here. So co-design is a great process if it's used for that purpose, but I think all too often, again, it's used in a fairly sort of tokenistic, superficial way. So I'd like to see more meaningful co-design. So ineffective insights. So the big one for me is the top point. So often I sit in meetings with prospective clients and they start talking to me about all this wonderful insight that they've generated. Typically what they're spitting at me is data. They're not actually talking to me about insight at all. And I think, again, we then act on that data under the mistaken belief that it's insight and then wonder why things go wrong. And in fact, oftentimes we don't bother to measure it because we know it's probably not going to work. So the metrics that we have around a lot of our stuff really isn't actually designed to measure behavioural shift at all anyway. But I think we need to be careful with that. Yeah, the insight's actually what's driving behaviour. It's not a data set that tells us that smoking prevalence has increased between this and this amount. Two very different things. And it's surprising just, you know, how far spread that happens. So, yeah, meaningful community insights rarely captured. Shift needed, use data as a means to generate meaningful insight. And again, more heavy reliance on lived experience, particularly in that problem definition phase for me is really important. I'm a huge fan of Roy's work, huge fan of the Behavioural Insights team. Initially I wasn't, now I'm a big fan, and I actually use behavioural insight a fair bit. But for me, I think, again, it's about balance, and I guess both the previous speakers have touched on this. So for me, this is my only contribution at all, anything original. Behavioural insight, citizen insight, 2020 insight. I think you need both, and I think with both you get a much better view, and I think you just have far more tools at your disposal. Okay, we spend millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars on messaging. And again, I remind you, caveats, generalisations. I'm a communicator. As I say, I've already confessed to being a journo, yeah, albeit many decades ago now. I'm a health communicator. I teach health comms. So I'm big on the value of communications, health education, etc., etc. But we do it too much. But my real issue is that it's our default. To borrow a phrase again from Rory. Yeah, so this is our default setting, and the procurement tends to be the issue here. And I think we probably all know this. I don't think there's anything new here, but I guess what I'm thinking is that given that we're all change agents in the room, hand on heart, we're actually here because we want to have an impact, then I do think it's incumbent on us to push back a little. So, and I think there are ways that you can do that without sort of bankrupting the business that you're working in, yeah? So I think we need to push back a little, particularly on procurement, and if we know something's not going to work, we need to flag that. You know, and 9 times out of 10, nothing will change, but once in every 10, you might get a little bit of shift and a little bit of movement. I've been able to do that, which is really pleasing. And in fact, one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment with St John's Ambulance is actually a piece that is using citizens. It's basically a citizen-informed policy piece. So we're talking to Aboriginal communities. I've been out at St Pat's talking to homeless people about how they're accessing services. That's going to inform the contract that's put forward by Department of Health next financial year in March. So that's really encouraging that there are these shifts and seeds starting to spread. So, yeah, shift needed, more holistic, multifaceted interventions. So, again, not to say it's not an important part of it, but some of the best social marketing programs I've seen haven't had any comms at all. They've all been sort of a design-based solution, for example. Multidisciplinary approaches, and also purpose before profit where possible, although I say that because I run a social enterprise, so I'm probably biased that way. Okay, tribalism. I won't dwell too much on this one. What's that? Oh dear, 10 minutes left. Lucky the panel sessions runs a bit longer. I've got a bit more time. Yeah, okay. So I definitely... yeah, okay. So tribalism, as I say, it's everywhere, yeah? So it's identity politics these days. I mean, that's really par for the course. So elections are more like sporting events, okay? It's increasingly only acting with people who think like we do, and this starts at an early age. And although, I mean, the evidence is there, about 95% of us think the same we think the same on about 95% of things. But what we tend to do is pick the one thing that we differ on. So, you know, the work that I've been doing in the climate change stuff, we've had climate change deniers walk into the room, and my goodness, you know, it's quite an event. But what actually comes out of it, after you get past the initial sort of mud throwing and mudslinging, what actually tends to come out of it is that there's actually a lot of common ground and a lot of commonality. I mean, it's just about attribution is what's causing climate change. You get past that and you actually start talking about, well, we've all got kids and we're all affected in this way, then there's actually a lot more commonality there. So I think that's an important thing to take on board, and I think, you know, for us, it's about, in terms of the one thing that I'd like to see us ensuring we don't do, it's avoiding opportunities to leverage on that in a negative way when we're affecting our change programs, because otherwise we just feed it. And it's not something that I'd like to see fed. And that's just a really nice quote. People are blind to the humanity of people who are not them. Farcical framing. Do you like the use of alliteration? I'm like sort of really pulling on alliteration through this presentation. I don't know if you noticed that. Framing is not always farcical. Yeah, again, another caveat. But I do believe we have far too much fear, shock, guilt. I've spoken about this in the past. I talk a lot about the use of humour, talk a lot about the use of positive framing. The commercial sector, it's well over 50% of their stuff is either overtly humorous or at least mildly humorous. In our space, typically, it was around 4 or 5% when I last did the talk. It's probably increased a bit. I think we're starting to come on board, but I still think we've got a long way to go. Just mindful of time. So again, this is just juxtaposing what they do, that tribe, versus us. So particularly Coca-Cola, they're the ones that I mean, you know, they bottle happiness. They've got happiness trucks travelling around the world. But you know, we've heard lots of examples of how corporates and brands are doing this sort of stuff, and they frame things in a really positive way. We, on the other hand, by default, tend to go down this path, certainly in public health. As I say, I acknowledge it's changing, but we still have an awful long way to go. This turns people off to our messaging, you know, and so they're synonymous with happiness and good times. So what are we synonymous with? Yeah, if we want to cut through, we've already got a lack of trust. It's problematical. It's advantage, big food, big tobacco, so on and so forth. So we need to think through this. Okay, this is an example of how I love to see it done. So this is the Truth campaign in Florida. It's been running for many years. I'm sure many of you are fairly familiar with this one. Fantastic campaign. This particular one was a digital piece. Jeff Jordan yesterday was saying how unlikely it would be that you would see somebody, so hip-hop youth. I think it's even less likely you're going to see a cat in an anti-smoking campaign, but this is what this is. So this was based on the insight, so it's targeting young girls, so teenage girls. Based on the insight, they really don't care if, you know, they're going to die of lung disease 50 years down the track. They discount that future cost, but they're worried about their pets. And so this is the ad, if we can play this. it's great. It's humorous. Everybody's smiling. Everybody's laughing. I shared it. It wasn't targeted at me. But this is another thing. I mean, you look at who shares what. I mean, I know I'm on Twitter a fair bit. I know, who shares a lot of the posts, particularly, again, in public health. It's other public health people sharing those posts. Yeah, it's not the people we're trying to reach. Yeah, and it's not just in public health, and I don't mean to pick on public. I am part of that machine, yeah. But I think we just need to be mindful of that as well. Okay, 5 tips for change agency, and it's about 5 minutes, is it? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this quote, have a read of that. So this was picked up at one of the climate health inquiry workshops that I did, and this is something that a lady just said, and I heard, and I quickly ran over and scribbled down, knowing I'd be coming here in a few weeks. So I think this absolutely breaks down the issue where I'm concerned, that we just don't do enough to engage communities. And as I say, I work a lot with disadvantaged community, I work a lot in disability, as homelessness, these sorts of groups. We actually, at one of these sessions, had the lady from WA Council of Social Services said she hadn't slept the night before because it was the first time that somebody from government had actually come along and spoken to these guys to get some input into policy. So she'd not slept, but she was really overwhelmed by the fact that we're actually coming in and doing it. So I think that speaks volumes. I've been trying to tackle these sort of issues for decades, yet this is the first time we've gone and had a chat. It just seems ridiculous to me, but there you go. So this sums it up, I think. So what can we do? 5 minutes plus 5 out of the 30-minute panel session, so 20. So embrace the agency bit. So for me, again, this is sort of coming back to the point that we've sort of, I think, sort of sit in the middle. We can act as conduits a little between, I guess, those communities that we're seeking to serve, but also government and others that we work with, the other agencies and NGOs. I think there's a really good opportunity for us to work with both and as I say, act as a conduit to ensure that the needs of these groups and everybody within there, not just the mainstream, get met. Avoid buzzwords. This is so cool. Okay, so this is the buzzword generator. If you haven't, there's a little link down here, so you'll get this slide set, so go to it. It's really, really fantastic. I have a real issue with buzzwords because I think, I'd sort of call a spade, not a shovel. I think that's a really useful approach, but I think a lot of people like the buzzwords. So you give this a spin, so I recommend having a look at this. It's good fun. Yeah, but I think it makes a point. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, probably in this space we could create our own one of these as well, because there's always something new being rolled out all the time. I think largely we're still doing the same things that we were doing 50, 60, 70 years ago. We're just calling them different things. We just need to do them better. This was from MIT Innovation Beyond the Buzz, again, just around innovation and buzz and buzzwords. So function of ego, competition, and the systems that reward them. So don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of innovation, but I just thought, again, this was a really useful quote. Vanilla Ice, I'll come to him, childhood hero. I like to think I was hip-hop, but it was Vanilla Ice, so maybe I wasn't a hip-hop youth. And then I sort of moved into alternative, and but that's a whole other tale. So we operate in systems that encourage competition, and that's really, really a good thing because it's designed to improve efficiency. And I think probably there's a sound argument that it does. I mean, competition's a good thing. But I'm not sure that better efficiency always leads to better outcomes in terms of behavioural outcomes and outcomes for communities, again, that we're looking to serve. So I think there's questions in and around that. For me, my organisation does what it says on the tins, behaviour change collaborative. I'm a big believer in collaboration. I'm a big believer in working, with ideally as many of the people in this room that would like to and beyond. I think there is just so much to be learned from everybody else, and I think working together, the collective is always so much better than the sum. I wonder if Vanilla will play. I'll connect. Does anyone know so Ice Ice Baby is the track. Does everyone know why he's there? Okay, I'm going to play it anyway. Bye. Ice, ice, baby. All right, stop, collaborate, and listen. That's so cool. So cool. So he was ahead of his time, was Vanilla, absolutely ahead of his time. I could see his sort of the symbolic figurehead for change agency moving. Yeah. Anyway, and now I've converted my son. He's a 90s house fan, is my son. So again, similar theme, touch less ego, dash more humility will improve the quality of anything you turn your hand to. I think that's really important. Yeah, I think sometimes we just take ourselves a bit too seriously. As you can tell, I don't take myself too seriously. I hope you're taking this moderately seriously. So number 4, I'm almost done. 1 minute, okay, almost done. So I won't dwell on this too much, and it's been a theme we've already heard, so accepting failure, I think that's important. I think we've not been particularly good at that. We kind of ignore failure. We don't measure because we know it's going to fail, but I think we just actually give it a crack, accept failure, share failures, learn from failures. Couple of fairly well-known examples as well. I don't have time to go to all of them. WD-40, for those of you who don't know, there were 39 attempts at the formula. The 40 bit is because on the 40th attempt, they came up with a formula that worked, yeah? And the Dyson vacuum cleaner, that was about 5,200 prototypes before he got something that worked, and then he still couldn't get anyone to actually do the sort of manufacturing in the US or Europe, so he basically set it up for himself, and the rest is history. But I think for me, social entrepreneurship, that sort of thing, we need to look at more social business, and actually, you know, public-private partnerships, social impact investment, this sort of stuff I think is really important in this space. I think we've still got a long way to go in terms of actually bringing that all online. So, yeah, I could say a lot more on that, but I don't have time. But this is important. So this was actually in B&T magazine last week, I think it was. And I think this speaks to where the future lies, okay? So 40% of Gen Z, so that's under 24s, believe brands have better ideas at solving Australian issues than do government. So that's really quite profound. We don't have all of the answers. Government doesn't have all the answers. We have some, but so do the brands. But people increasingly are looking to the brands. So I think we need to play nice a little more than we do. And I think we need to be a bit more open in our thinking and a bit more collaborative in our thinking where possible. Final slide. I think this has been covered quite well in the previous, and because I'm over time, I'm not going to go into it a great deal. The only thing I would talk to here is social cohesion, because I'm a big sort of advocate for and feel really passionate about the need to sort of build community and for social cohesion generally. And again, I just think sometimes we sort of come here collectively, but then we will go away to our organisations and we'll look at our particular behavioural challenge, and we will go about implementing interventions that we think that work without really thinking about the ripple effects for everybody else who's doing change work over there. And the classic example I always pull out is, you know, I'm one for, as I say, wanting to build community sort of around my home. We've all got big fences, and then what the water authority, for example, would do is encourage us to peek over the fence and report the neighbour if they're watering outside of their hours. So it's like, hi, I'm your neighbour, and by the way, I've reported you to the water authority. So I don't see how, I understand the rationale, but I don't see how that builds cohesion. I just think there's a lack of linked up thinking. So the problems that we're trying to solve, they're not linear, they're complex. I think absolutely needs sort of more than 1, 2, or even 3 approaches in many instances. But I think on this slide, the key takeaway is that we, you know, the left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing, and that means we need to collaborate a lot more. I think that's it. Thank you.